At my own wedding, surrounded by the hum of laughter, clinking glasses, and familiar faces from chapters of my life, I'd almost forgotten. I stood there, clutching a delicate flute of champagne, when the unthinkable happened. My stepmother, Karen, leaning in toward my Aunt Linda, who, bless her, had always been the only tether left to my mom's side of the family, didn't even bother to lower her voice. She spoke with the icy, cutting precision she had perfected over the years, as though she wanted me to hear every syllable. "She's just playing make-believe," Karen sneered, lips curling into that practiced smile she wore like armor, acting like someone actually loves her. I heard it, clear as crystal. Every cruel word landed like a punch to the gut, sharp and suffocating. And before I could even register the depth of her malice, my father, yes, the man who once taught me how to ride a bike, who used to hum silly songs to me at bedtime, chuckled. Not a strained or awkward laugh, but an actual hearty laugh that echoed through the elegantly decorated reception hall. "She's lucky Jack even showed up," he added with a smirk, shaking his head as if I were some charity case who had stumbled into a fairy tale I didn't deserve. I felt the air thicken around me, my stomach lurching like I'd been sucker punched while standing just a few feet from the cake table, where the servers bustled, oblivious to the emotional storm unraveling just steps away. The soft glow of the chandelier above, the gentle melody of the string quartet, the swirl of guests sharing stories and toasts, it all blurred into a backdrop of noise I couldn't connect with. All I could hear was Karen's cruel whisper, looping over and over in my mind like a broken record. "She's just pretending to be loved." And the sound of my father's laugh, as if my entire existence was some elaborate joke. That was the man who, once upon a time, had carried me on his shoulders at the county fair, who told me stories about constellations while we camped in the backyard, who kissed my forehead when I lost my first tooth. But that version of him had vanished the day he met Karen. Or maybe he had always been that man, and I had just refused to see it. After Mom died, something inside him turned brittle, or maybe it simply shifted focus to Karen and her daughter, Madison. Either way, I became a leftover piece from a life he'd already packed away in boxes. For years, I tiptoed around their fragile egos, desperate to be seen again. I aced my classes, kept my head down, smiled through Karen's passive-aggressive comments at dinner, accepted Madison's endless parade of new clothes while I wore faded hand-me-downs from her charity pile. I told myself it was temporary, that he'd notice me if I was patient, if I was perfect. But the truth is, he never did. And yet, on this day, my wedding day, when I had dared to hope for something different, I'd let myself believe that maybe the love swirling in the air, the vows, the lace, the carefully arranged centerpieces would be enough to make them show up for me. Just this once, I was wrong. Instead, I stood in my ivory gown, hand trembling around the delicate stem of my glass, and heard Karen strip my relationship down to a performance, an act, a lie. And my own father laughed along, mocking my worth as if I were a prop in someone else's play. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the polished hardwood floors and escape the humiliation tightening around my chest. But then, in the stillness of that moment, something shifted. Jack, my husband, my anchor, the one person who had always seen me without conditions, must have noticed the way my face fell, the way my breath caught in my throat. I didn't even know he was watching me then, but he was, always was. Without a word, without ceremony, Jack strode toward the mic stationed at the corner of the dance floor. There was no announcement, no fanfare, just the sound of him clearing his throat, a simple, steady sound that cut through the room like a crack in glass. Chatter faded. Forks clattered to plates. Every eye turned to him, freezing in a ripple of confusion and anticipation. Jack stood there, calm but firm, shoulders squared, his gaze steady and unflinching as it landed directly on my father and Karen. You could feel the shift in the room, like the wind had been knocked out of everyone at once.
He didn't smile. He didn't crack a joke. He just breathed in deeply, and, in that quiet, sure voice that could still the busiest of rooms, said, "I'm marrying Grace for one reason." The room held its breath. I held mine too. No one could have predicted what came next, but in those few seconds, Jack didn't just change the mood. He shattered something open, and the look on their faces, on Karen's,
On my father's, I would carry that memory with me for the rest of my life. If you've ever found yourself holding your breath in moments like that, wishing someone would stand up for you, or even wishing you could stand up for yourself, then you'll understand why I share these stories. And if they resonate with you, I hope you'll consider supporting the channel by liking this video or subscribing. It helps me continue to share these honest, imperfect, but deeply real moments that connect us in the spaces where we often feel most unseen. The morning of my wedding unfolded like one of those sepia-tinted dreams you half remember upon waking, the kind so fragile and sweet they feel like they belong to someone else's story entirely. Sunlight slanted through the windows of the bridal suite in soft amber streaks, kissing the pale walls and shimmering against the sequins of dresses draped over chairs. My bridesmaids fluttered around me in a chaos of perfume, laughter, and hurried adjustments, pinning wayward curls, tugging at the delicate lace of my gown, teasing me over the bowl of strawberries I refused to abandon. The truth was, I couldn't stomach anything else. Every bite felt too heavy, too real. Strawberries, their sweetness delicate and harmless, were all I could manage. Yet beneath the silk robe, beneath the perfectly glossed lips and lashes that curled like feathers, I was suffocating on air too thick with expectations. It wasn't Jack I doubted. Never. That love, the quiet, unwavering love he poured into the corners of my life, was the only thing I never questioned. No, what gnawed at my edges was the other thing. The silent dread I had tried so hard to bury under color-coded seating charts and hydrangea arrangements. The looming, inevitable presence of my family. Karen arrived precisely when she knew all eyes would be on her. She glided into the room swathed in a gown, the exact shade of contempt disguised as champagne. She insisted it was beige, definitely not white, though we both understood the unspoken message threaded into the hem. She carried herself with the self-satisfied grace of a socialite touring a hotel lobby she already deemed beneath her, complimenting the decor with clipped approval, as if the flowers and linens had arranged themselves just for her judgment. Without so much as a glance in my direction, she claimed the makeup chair meant for me, crossing her legs like she owned the place. She pressed a cold, perfunctory kiss against my cheek, the kind that left no warmth, no sincerity, only a ghost of touch, and with a syrupy smile that never reached her eyes, she said, "Let's hope you don't get too weepy during the vows, Grace. Even the best waterproof mascara has its limits. No, I'm proud of you. No, you look beautiful. Just another dig, carefully laced in sugar, a dagger cloaked in silk. Her specialty." My father arrived an hour later, a shadow in a pressed suit, carrying nothing but silence and indifference. He didn't ask how I was, didn't marvel at the sight of his daughter in white, poised on the brink of a new life. His eyes flicked over the room, calculating, cold, before settling on me like I was an item on a checklist. "Well," he said, nodding like an indifferent employer appraising an employee's work attire, "you look ready, ready. Not radiant, not beautiful, just ready. Like I was preparing to walk into a sterile boardroom instead of the most significant moment of my life." That's who he had become. A man stripped of softness, of warmth, a man hollowed out by his own silence. Sometimes I wondered if he remembered the girl who used to race him down the hallway, squealing in delight just to wrap her arms around him before he could set down his briefcase. That man had vanished when my mother died. I supposed in some cruel way, we both disappeared a little that year. I was 13, old enough to understand that grief didn't always howl in pain. It often sat heavy and quiet, seeping into the crevices of everyday life. I remembered the scent of her sweaters as we packed them away. I remembered her humming in the kitchen, the way she stirred pasta while singing softly to herself. I remembered how within months, Karen had moved into our house, her daughter Madison trailing behind her like a princess in training, while my father slipped seamlessly into a life that no longer seemed to have a place for me. From the moment Karen set foot in our home, I became a ghost in my own life, not invisible to the world, but to the one man who should have made me feel safe. Karen never wasted breath on outright cruelty in public. No, her art was subtle, private, weaponizing smiles and offhand comments that left me bleeding in places no one could see. And my father, he let it happen. He let me shrink, day after day, year after year, until I forgot what it felt like to take up space. So on my wedding day, as I stood in front of the full-length mirror, the weight of satin and sequins pooling around me like armor, I gripped tightly to the one thing I knew to be real. Jack. He saw me. He always had. 3 years ago, at a volunteer event for foster youth, I met him by chance, or maybe by fate. I was leading a writing workshop, scribbling prompts onto a whiteboard. He was in charge of the art supplies, arranging paintbrushes with a concentration that made me smile. We barely spoke until lunch, when he slid into the seat across from me, his hazel eyes warm and amused, and said, "You look like someone who believes in lost causes." I laughed then, a laugh that felt like the first real breath I had taken in years, and in that instant, something inside me whispered that this was no ordinary meeting. Jack never made me audition for his love. He never kept me at arm's length, or made me beg for scraps of attention. He listened. He showed up. He learned the difference between the days I needed comfort and the days I needed space. With him, I never felt like a project to be fixed. I was simply enough. That was why, on this day, beneath the facade of lace and celebration, the pain cut deeper than I could have anticipated. I thought I had built something strong enough to stand proudly before the people who had always belittled me, to show them that I had carved out a life, a love, on my own terms. I believed foolishly that maybe my father would finally look at me and see someone worth championing, that maybe, just for the sake of appearances, Karen might feign happiness for me. But even as the ceremony began, as I clutched Jack's hands and stared into the face of the man who had made me feel chosen every single day, I felt Karen's gaze on me like a stone on my chest, heavy and suffocating. I sensed my father's posture, tense, rigid, as though even this sacred moment inconvenienced him. Still, I smiled. I vowed. I convinced myself the hardest part was behind me. I couldn't have been more wrong. The ceremony, though simple and intimate, unfolded like something from a cherished storybook. Jack stumbled over his vows, his voice breaking as he whispered, "You're the calm in every storm I didn't even know I was weathering." I barely made it through mine, without tears. For those fleeting, perfect hours, it felt as though the years of burden I carried were forgotten, irrelevant even. As we walked back up the aisle, hand in hand, the applause and laughter painted a picture I almost believed in, a photograph for the future, one we'd show our children someday. But magic, I learned, has a short lifespan. At the reception, the tables glowed under the flicker of candles. Each guest found at their place a handwritten card from me, a token of gratitude, a personal touch I had hoped would make the night feel like a warm embrace. Guests smiled, teared up, whispered that it felt like the coziest, most loving wedding they'd ever attended. I tried so hard to hold on to that bubble, clinking glasses, swaying to music, leaning into the joy Jack's family wrapped around me like a safety net. Yet even within that cocoon of love, there was a shadow trailing me, stretching longer with every hour. Her name was Karen. Of course, she claimed her throne at the head table, seated regally beside my father, legs crossed, a glass of white wine perpetually in hand, posture immaculate, expressions measured, calculated. She scanned the room like royalty inspecting peasants, her face carefully schooled into the mask of someone important, necessary, when in truth, she was nothing more than an obligation I could no longer avoid. I moved through the reception like a ghost wrapped in white silk, floating from table to table, letting the rhythm of small talk, laughter, and polite hugs guide me through the motions of celebration. I twirled on the dance floor with Jack's nieces, their tiny hands sticky from cupcake frosting, as they clung to the layers of my gown. I embraced old college friends, whose faces, blurred by time and distance, still carried echoes of familiarity. I smiled until my cheeks ached, thanking guests with carefully measured gratitude, as though rehearsing a part in a play where I was meant to sparkle. But in the lull between dances, as the servers quietly wheeled out the towering cake and the MC fussed over the microphone, I found myself alone behind the head table, shoulders rising and falling too fast as I fought to steady the breath that wouldn't come. It was in that brittle silence that I heard her, Karen. She made no effort to lower her voice, no attempt at discretion, as though she relished the sharpness of her words slicing through the hum of the evening like a dagger through silk. Leaning toward my Aunt Linda, one of the last flickering ties to my mother's vanished world, Karen spoke with the venomous sweetness she wielded like an art form. She's just playing house, she sneered, her lips curling into that signature smug smile. All for show, like anyone could ever really love her. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, as if she'd hurled them like stones at the fragile windows of my heart. To her, to them, I was little more than a prop in my own story, a pitiful actress desperate for applause. And then came the sound that shattered whatever resolve I had left. My father's laugh. Not a nervous chuckle. Not the embarrassed titter of a man caught in an awkward moment. No, it was a full-bodied guttural snort, the kind he used to reserve for barstool stories and locker-room jokes. She's lucky Jack even showed up, he added, shaking his head in that condescending way that always made me feel 10 inches tall. He'll wise up soon enough. I hadn't even realized how tightly I was clutching the delicate champagne flute until the glass creaked beneath my grip, its fragile neck threatening to snap. They didn't see me standing there. Or maybe they did, and simply didn't care. My entire body locked into stillness, breath shallow, the glittering room spinning and swirling until the lights blurred into a kaleidoscope of suffocating brightness. It was as though I had been dragged beneath the surface of my own wedding, drowning in the cruelty that had always lurked just beneath the facade. Turning away before the tears breached the dam, I forced a brittle smile toward the photographer as he passed, murmuring something hollow about needing fresh air, though what I truly needed was escape. Out on the terrace, the night air bit at my flushed cheeks as I stood barefoot on the cold stone, staring blankly at the glittering lights of the city below, feeling smaller than I ever had. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply stood there, clutching the remnants of dignity I had left, struggling to breathe through the weight of a lifetime spent making myself smaller, quieter, more palatable for them. For Karen's snide remarks delivered with a smile, for my father's crushing silence that drowned out every desperate plea for attention. I had spent my entire life contorting myself into the good daughter, the obedient stepchild, the invisible presence they barely tolerated, and here I was, a grown woman, a wife, and still it wasn't enough. Still, I found myself slipping back into the old role I knew too well. Don't ruin anything. Don't make a scene. Smile through the hurt. But as I peered through the frosted glass of the reception hall, my gaze landed on Jack. There he was, laughing easily with one of my cousins, utterly unaware of the fresh wound I was bleeding inside. Something about that moment, the contrast between his open, generous love and the cold void left by the people who should have loved me first, cracked something open inside me, not in a way that made me fragile, but in a way that awakened a sleeping part of me that had grown tired of pretending. I couldn't go back in there and play the part of the dutiful bride, smiling through cake cutting and empty speeches as though everything were perfect. Because it wasn't, and I was finished carrying the burden of silence. What I didn't know then, as I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped back inside, was that Jack had already sensed it. That, even without hearing the words himself, he had caught enough of my unraveling to make his own decision. And though I didn't know it yet, that decision would change everything. When I crossed the threshold, something in the air felt different. Or perhaps it was me who had changed. I dabbed carefully beneath my eyes, ensuring no tear stains betrayed the fracture inside. I smiled dutifully at the photographer, waved stiffly at a cousin, as though nothing had happened. No one noticed that beneath the layers of tulle and smiles, I was disintegrating. No one, except Jack. The moment my eyes found him across the room, he paused mid-sentence, breaking off a conversation with his brother to study my face, as though trying to decipher a language only he spoke. His brow furrowed in concern, his expression darkened by a question he didn't need to ask aloud. What happened? But I didn't answer. I didn't need. Instead, I pasted on another hollow smile, reached for my water glass, and took my seat at the head table, steeling myself for the next act in this charade. The MC's cheerful voice pierced the heavy atmosphere, tapping the microphone and inviting anyone with well wishes or anecdotes to speak now. The room responded with polite applause, and guests took turns weaving sweet, predictable tales. Jack's aunt shared a story about his childhood lemonade stands. My friend Rachel recounted how I once left work early to help her rescue her dog from a botched surgery. They were kind words, warm moments, the sort you expect at weddings, but they washed over me like static. I couldn't hear them. All I heard was Karen's voice, looping like a curse in my mind. All I could see was my father's smug face as he tipped his wine glass toward nothing in particular, nodding now and then as if he were the guest of honor at an event he barely tolerated. They sat just 2 seats away, calm, composed, as though they hadn't gutted me with their words minutes earlier. Karen wore that self-satisfied smile, the one she donned like a crown whenever she believed she had won. My father, ever the master of indifference, stared vacantly at the ruby pool in his glass. How could they be so cruel, so unflinching, and still sip their wine, as if they weren't monsters? And then, without preamble, Jack rose. He didn't wait for an introduction, didn't glance my way for permission. He simply stood, straight-backed and sure, a quiet storm brewing behind his calm eyes. My hand shot out, gripping his wrist in reflex, my voice barely a whisper. "Jack, what are you doing?" He leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss against my hair, his breath soft against my temple. "Trust me," he murmured, his voice a low promise. Then he walked toward the microphone, and the room followed him into silence. Most people assumed Jack was rising for a toast. After all, it was that time of night, the speeches, the laughter, the sentimental stories. But when he stood, he wasn't holding a glass. His hands, empty and steady, hung at his sides like anchors. There was no smile softening his features, no lightness in his posture. Instead, there was something else, a heaviness, a stillness, that gripped his shoulders and radiated from his gaze, sharp as broken glass. He took a breath, deliberate and slow, his eyes fixed unflinchingly on Karen and my father. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the room with the gravity of something sacred, something that demanded to be heard. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight," Jack began, and the tremor in his voice was not from nerves, but from restraint, from the weight of words he could no longer hold inside. "But there's something I can't sit quietly with anymore." My heart plunged into the hollow of my chest. I wanted to shrink, to disappear beneath the table, to run from what I knew was coming. There was no stopping him now. I knew Jack well enough to understand that once the dam had cracked, the flood would come, and all I could do was hold my breath and brace for the current. He turned slightly, acknowledging the rest of the room, but his focus remained tethered to them, Karen and my father, his words slicing through the air like a blade. "I didn't fall in love with Grace because she's perfect," he said, and his voice, though calm, was laced with a quiet ferocity that sent a hush rippling through the crowd. "I didn't choose her because she's easy or convenient. I chose her because she's real, because she's resilient in ways most people will never understand." Jack paused, letting the truth hang heavy in the silence, his eyes never wavering. "She carries more pain than most hearts could bear, and still, she leads with kindness. I've seen her walk into rooms full of people who turned their backs on her, and still, she finds a way to offer them grace." His words caught on that name, my name, and for a fleeting second, I felt seen, truly seen. He shifted slightly, his gaze sweeping over the guests now, his voice tightening like a fist. "She's not pretending to be loved. She is loved. Fiercely. By me. By the friends who know her heart. By the family she chose, the ones who see her for who she is." The room, once filled with the easy buzz of celebration, now held its breath, the tension palpable, like a string stretched too tight. "And I didn't show up today because I'm doing her a favor," Jack continued, turning his full attention now to my father, his voice hardening. "I showed up because marrying her is the best decision I'll ever make, because I get to spend my life beside someone who chooses, every single day, to rise above the people who tried to break her." I watched as the color drained from my father's face, his features tightening into something almost brittle. Jack didn't flinch, didn't blink, as he delivered the final blow, his voice softening only in reverence to the woman he saw in me. "I'm proud to marry her. Not despite where she came from, because of it. Because she still loves in a world that never made it easy for her." Silence followed, thick, suffocating, sacred. There was no applause, no murmured approval, only the heavy stillness of a truth spoken so raw that it stripped the room bare. Jack returned to his seat, his hand immediately seeking mine, his touch grounding me as though I might float away if he didn't hold me there, in that moment, in that truth. I couldn't speak, I couldn't even breathe. I just stared at him, wide open, awash in the enormity of what he had just done for me. Karen didn't speak another word for the rest of the night. She sat there, lips pressed tight, her glass of untouched white wine trembling slightly in her hand. Her gaze darted from guest to guest, calculating, searching for anyone still on her side. She found no one, and my father, true to form, didn't even lift his eyes. He sat in that chair, hollow, staring into the abyss of his wineglass, like a man finally forced to hear the silence he had created all these years. It should have felt like justice, but it didn't. It felt sad. Pathetic, really, that he had a daughter, and yet he had never truly seen her. That I had wasted so many years begging for a seat at a table he never intended to make room for me. I turned back to Jack, who brushed a loose curl from my cheek, his fingertips tender. "Okay," he whispered. I nodded, barely, but inside I knew it wasn't just okay. It was everything. The room, once suffocated by tension, seemed to exhale with me. It was as though the air had shifted, lighter now, freer, the weight finally lifted. People approached us. Us, not Karen, not my father, but me and Jack. Jack's cousins wrapped me in warm embraces. My old high school teacher, Miss Fletcher, smiled at me with tears in her eyes and said, "He's a good man, Grace. But you're the reason this room feels like love tonight." Jess, my friend from college, whispered fiercely in my ear, "You're not pretending. You are the most loved woman here." And for the first time in my life, I let myself believe it. The rest of the reception unfurled like a long-held breath, finally released. The music was no longer background noise. It was a pulse in our veins. The laughter echoed through the hall, not the polite, brittle kind that kept people in their place, but the rich, full-bodied kind that made the chandeliers tremble. Jack and I danced, not the stiff, orchestrated shuffle of newlyweds, under scrutiny, but the kind of dancing that left us breathless and spinning, our laughter colliding, our bodies colliding, the world beyond the two of us blurring into irrelevance. Later, as the cake was rolled out, the MC offered the mic one last time for any final toasts. Karen shifted, rising halfway out of her chair, her face a mask of forced grace. I held my breath, unsure if she was about to deliver some petty remark, disguised as elegance. But she glanced at my father, read the room like a defeated politician, and sat back down. That silence, that was my peace offering. We cut the cake. My best friend caught the bouquet. The flower girl passed out in her mother's lap, crumbs of cookies still clinging to her lips. It wasn't the perfect wedding I had dreamed of as a child. It was better. It was real. It had cracks and scars, and the kind of honesty that made you feel seen, fully and without apology. But the truest moment, the one that etched itself into the marrow of my bones, didn't come during the speeches or the dancing. It came later, in the parking lot, after the last of the guests had drifted into the night. I stood barefoot on the cool concrete, heels dangling from one hand, my dress gathered in the other, as Jack opened the car door for me. He paused, silhouetted by the street lamp, his eyes soft with concern. "You okay? Really?" he asked, his voice stripped of pretense. I looked at the man who had stood in front of a room full of people and shattered a lifetime of silence for me. I smiled, a smile that came from a place deeper than I knew I possessed. "I am now," I whispered, and I meant it. In the days that followed, the world slowed down, the flowers wilted, the chairs were returned, the photos trickled in from friends' phones. Messages arrived, praising the beauty of the ceremony, the courage of Jack's words. But beneath the thank you notes and the leftover cake, something inside me had shifted, something permanent, irreversible. I was no longer the woman who walked down the aisle hoping her father might finally say something kind. I was no longer the girl who spent her life contorting herself into something palatable enough to be loved by people incapable of it. I wasn't pretending anymore, and for the first time in my life, I had laid down the burden of the shame they handed me. In the days that followed the wedding, the world grew quiet in ways both expected and not. My father, true to his pattern of absence, offered nothing, no call, no message, not even the obligatory text acknowledging that his daughter had crossed into a new chapter of her life. His silence, once sharp enough to pierce me, now echoed hollow and weightless, like a bell that had lost its ring. "Karen," unsurprisingly retreated into the same hush, her final act a studied withdrawal, as though she couldn't find the words or the performance that might excuse the spectacle Jack had delivered in front of a room full of witnesses. And yet, what startled me most wasn't their silence. It was my own response to it. I didn't miss them, that gnawing hunger for their approval, the one that had stalked me for decades, shadowing every accomplishment, every choice. It was gone, as if it had quietly expired the moment Jack's words cracked open, the lies I had been clinging to for far too long. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel wounded. I felt light, unburdened, free. For the first time in my life, I stepped into therapy not out of desperation or despair, but with a heart curious to understand itself. I wasn't broken, but I needed to know why I had stood so long in the cold, waiting at a locked door that was never going to open. Why I had let their absence, their scorn, sculpt the shape of my worth. Why I had mistaken endurance for love, suffering for loyalty. I learned truths that felt like revelations, and yet also like things I had always known deep down, but never dared to say aloud. That boundaries are not cruelty, but care. That family isn't defined by blood, but by those who show up when the lights dim and the room empties. And most profoundly, that love, real, whole, unconditional love, isn't something you audition for, it's something you accept bravely, when you finally decide you deserve it. Jack and I settled into a house that creaked with charm and imperfections, wooden stairs that groaned beneath our feet, windows that rattled when the wind picked up, and bookshelves that overflowed like our conversations at midnight. We filled the rooms with messy dinners, game nights that stretched into mornings, documentaries that made us cry, and bad movies that made us laugh until our sides hurt. We didn't speak often about the wedding after that first week, not because we were avoiding the memory, but because we didn't need to unpack it to understand what it had meant. It had already done its work. One warm evening, months later, as a summer storm rolled in and the scent of rain mingled with the worn wood of our porch, Jack said something that stopped me cold. He was staring out at the bruised horizon, his voice soft but certain. "You know," he said, his hand brushing mine as thunder rumbled in the distance. "I didn't stand up that night to defend you." His eyes stayed fixed on the sky, as though the words were meant more for the universe than for me. "I stood up because I knew you didn't need defending. You just needed someone to remind the room of who you already are." His words struck a chord deep in the hollow of my chest, resonating like a truth I had carried inside me all along but never given myself permission to speak. He was right. I had always known who I was. I had just been waiting for someone to say it out loud so I could believe it too. But now I didn't need them. Not Karen, not my father, not anyone. Because I had finally said it to myself. I am enough. I am worthy. I am loved fully, deeply, without apology or conditions. And if someone couldn't see that, it said nothing about me, and everything about the limits of their love. And so, if there is someone out there, someone like the woman I used to be, sitting quietly, swallowing their own voice while the world told them they were too much, or not enough, or simply hard to love, hear this. You are not the reflection in the eyes of those too broken to recognize your light. You are not a puzzle to be solved, a project to be fixed, or a role to be played to earn a standing ovation. You are not pretending. And you don't have to wait for a wedding or a microphone or some grand cinematic moment to claim that truth. You only need one small, brave thing to stop shrinking. That day didn't unfold like the glossy fairy tale I had once sketched in childhood journals. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, unscripted, and breathtakingly real. And it was mine. Every fractured, luminous, defiant moment of it. And if I could go back, I wouldn't change a thing. Because that was the day I stopped waiting for permission to be loved and started standing in the love that had been mine all along. If, by chance, these words find you, if you've ever been overlooked, silenced, or underestimated, I hope you remember you deserve to be seen, exactly as you are. And if you're still waiting for someone to say it, let me say it now. You are worthy. You are loved. And I hope this story gives you the courage to stop waiting and start believing in your own worth. And if you've found even a sliver of meaning here, perhaps take a second to show it. Like the story, share it with someone who might be carrying a hurt you can't see. You never know who needs to hear it. Drop a comment. Tell me your story. Tell me what you would have said if you had the mic that night. And if you want more stories like this raw, real, unpolished in the best way, go ahead and hit subscribe, turn on the bell if you'd like, so you don't miss what's coming next. But above all, thank you for listening.